Let's cover period 1 of AP US history. So we have Native American societies before European contact. Before Europeans arrived, Native American societies were advanced, diverse, and adapted to their environments in different ways. In the American Southwest, the spread of maize cultivation from present-day Mexico supported larger settlements, irrigation systems, and social development. One of these major examples are Cahokia, a large Mississippian city known for its mound building, trade, and organized political structure. Many of these societies were organized through kinship networks, and some were matrilineal, meaning descent and inheritance was traced through the mother's line. In farming societies, the three sisters, corn, bean, and squash, were grown together because they supported each other and helped sustain permanent settlements. In the Northeast, Mississippi River, and along the Atlantic seaboard, some groups developed mixed agricultural and hunter-gatherer economies, which allowed for more permanent villages. In the Northwest and present-day California, Native people often depended on hunting, fishing, and gathering, especially the rich resources of the Pacific coast. In the Great Basin and Great Plains, many societies developed more mobile lifestyles because of drier land and grasslands. So, in European exploration and Columbian exchange, things you need to know are that the European exploration was driven by wealth, competition, and religion. European nations wanted new trade routes, more resources, and the distance to spread Christianity. Spain explored for gold, silver, and the spread of Catholicism, often remembered as God, Gold, and Glory. France focused more on the fur trade, alliances with native groups, and missionary work. The Dutch focused heavily on trade profits and used joint stock companies to support their colonization. Britain wanted to use wealth through trade, colonization, and rivalry with Spain. Portugal focused on maritime trade, routes to Asia, and plantation systems using enslaved labor. New maritime technologies like astrolabe, compass, and improved ships made long-distance ocean travel easier. The Columbian Exchange was a transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and ideas between the Old World and the New World after 1492. In Europe, it led to dietary change, population growth, and new crops like potatoes and maize, which helped economic growth. In the Americas, it brought devastating diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, causing a massive decline in the native population. It also brought horses, cattle, and other animals, changing the native life and the environment. So we had a transformation of both sides of the Atlantic, but it was specifically destructive for the indigenous populations. Now, we have Spanish colonization, labor, slavery, and caste. So the growing growth of the Spanish Empire in the Americas created a major social and economic hierarchy. Spain built a system based off of its forced labor, racial ranking, and the extraction of wealth. One major system was the encomienda system, in which Spaniards controlled the native labor and demanded tribute. Another forced system was the repartimiento, which required native people to provide labor for part of the year. Spanish colonization also became tied to a broader Atlantic slave trade, especially as labor demand increased. Spain created a caste system which ranked people based on race and birthplace. At the top were peninsulars, people born in Spain. People below them were Creoles, people of Spanish descent born in the Americas, and mixed race groups called mestizos were people of mixed Spanish and native ancestry. Indigenous and African people were placed lower in the social hierarchy, and this caste system was used by the Spanish to justify their inequality and maintain their power. Now we have the ideas of cultural interactions between Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans. So contact between Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans created both conflict and cultural blending. European and Native Americans often had very different views on religion, land use, gender roles, and political authority. Europeans tried to convert Native people to Christianity, but this sometimes led to syncretism, meaning the blending of religious beliefs and practices. Another major example of syncretism is the Virgin of Guadalupe, which mixed Catholic and indigenous meanings. Europeans often had patriarchal ideas, meaning male-dominated social structures, which often clashed with Native societies that gave women more influence. One major source of conflict was the land use. Europeans believed in private property and permanent ownership. Many Native groups viewed land more as a shared resource that was used by the community. There was also a middle ground in some of these regions, meaning a space of negotiation and exchange where neither side had full control. Africans were brought through the slave trade and became a larger part of this exchange, creating a three-way cultural interaction. So, For context and causation, during this time period of 1491 to 1607, we have to understand that these encounters in the Americas, they have to be looked at from the lens of Europe. So the Renaissance was occurring around this time, which encouraged ideas of curiosity, exploration, and learning. The Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation increased religious competition in Europe. New maritime technologies like the caravel, compass, and astrolabe, along with funding systems like joint stock companies, made the transatlantic voyages possible. Now, before European contact, native societies already had complex economies, trade systems, and political organizations. One effect of transatlantic voyages was the massive population decline of Native Americans from disease and conquest. A second effect was the growth of the Atlantic slave trade, especially as Europeans demanded more labor. A third effect was the Columbian Exchange, which again transformed their diets, economies, and environments. And we also had establishments of these hybrid cultures that came from a mix of all these different things interacting. So we also have European colonization. So Spanish colonies again use encomienda, repartimiento, and missions to Christianize native people and exploit native labor. Spain, they heavily focused on areas like Florida, Southwest, and other frontier regions. French colonies developed around the fur trade, alliances with native people, and less dense settlements. The French often cooperated with more native groups because the trade relationships were more essential for them. Dutch colonization centered on New Netherland, especially trade in the Hudson River region. The Dutch used a patroon system, granting large estates to wealthy landowners to encourage settlements. English colonies grew in several patterns. So we had Jamestown, which was established in 1607, which was our first official permanent settlement and developed around tobacco as a cash crop. Now, the headright system encouraged migration by giving land to those who paid for passage. The Plymouth colony, which was founded in 1620, was created by the Pilgrims who were seeking religious freedom. And the Massachusetts Bay Colony, founded in 1630, was a Puritan colony built on religion and community. Now we have interactions between the Native Americans and Europeans in the period. So interactions are going to change our cooperation in trade to conflict and resistance. So we had Metacom's War, which was also known as King Philip's War from 1675 to 1678, and it was caused by English expansion into native land and causing conflict over power, trade, and settlement. The war was extremely bloody and weakened native resistance in New England. A second example is Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. So frontier settlers in Virginia were angry at Governor Berkeley, native conflict, and the elite privilege that people in the colonies had. So Bacon's Rebellion was a result of the class tension between these poor settlers and the wealthy planters. So it helped Virginia push toward a greater reliance on African slavery instead of indentured servants after these group of people were insurrectionists, because they would lean towards slaves who would not do the same. Now, a third is an example of Pueblo Revolt in 1680. So the Pueblo's Revolt was against the Spanish's harsh rule, forced labor, and the religious oppression that they faced. And it was one of the most successful native uprisings in colonial history. So then after this, the Spanish returned back to rule, but then they were more careful. Now we have slavery in the British colonies. Slavery grew in the British colonies because the colonists did a large, controllable labor force. Plantation agriculture, especially tobacco, rice, and indigo, they require intense labor. And as indentured servitude declined, colonists turned increasingly to African slavery. The transatlantic slave trade expanded to meet this labor demand. In New England, there were fewer enslaved people, and slavery was more connected to ports, shipping, and household. In the middle colonies, slavery existed in moderate levels, especially in urban and port areas like New York City and Philadelphia. In the Chesapeake, slavery became heavily tied to tobacco plantations. In the South, especially in South Carolina, slavery became essential to the plantation agriculture, especially rice and indigo. The Middle Passage was the brutal voyage that brought enslaved Africans to the Americas under horrifying conditions. We had enslaved people resisting through running away and work slowdowns, preserving family culture and open revolt. One of these major examples that you have to know is the Stono Rebellion of 1739 in South Carolina. So this is when some enslaved people escaped and formed maroon communities. And over time, as a result of them escaping, people made more laws that made slavery hereditary. So it's not like if you have a kid, that kid is no longer in slavery. If you have a kid, your mother or father was enslaved, you're going to be enslaved too. So we have ideas of colonial society, culture, and identity. So colonial society developed through the movement of people, ideas, and goods across the Atlantic. The headright system encouraged migration to colonies like Virginia by offering some land. In the Chesapeake and the South, cash crops like tobacco helped build plantation and economies. We have the Plymouth colony, which grew from religious separatists seeking freedom. We have Massachusetts Bay, again, from Puritans who wanted a model Christian society. Over time, these colonies became more diverse in population and culture. We have print culture, which was books, newspapers, and pamphlets, helped spread the ideas quickly. We had the Great Awakening, which was a major religious revival that stressed personal faith and emotional preaching. We had George Whitefield, which was a preacher who helped connect the colonists through shared religious experiences. And we have Enlightenment, which also influenced colonial life by emphasizing reason, science, and natural rights. So colonists, they eventually developed stronger local institutions like the House of Burgesses, colonial assemblies, and town meetings. Now we have the colonization overall of North America was shaped by our religious conflicts in Europe, population growth, economic pressure, and rivalry among empires like Spain, France, England, and Netherlands. Again, we have the Columbian Exchange. We have New England, consisting of mainly small family farms, Puritan communities, shipping, fishing, and trade, and more town-based settlement. A lot of education as well. We have the middle colonies, our breadbasket, which was more ethically and religiously diverse, with fertile land and grain farming, which was New York and Pennsylvania with the Quakers. The Chesapeake was focused heavily on tobacco and relied on indentured servitude and later on slavery because of all the farming that they had to do. And the southern colonies were mainly cash crops. We had plantation economies such as rice, indigo, and enslaved labor. And all these colonies were a part of the Atlantic economy that operated under British mercantilism, which is the idea that these colonies are going to be generating money and then sending that money back to their mother country. So the Navigation Acts, they tried to make the colonial trade serve England. But during much of the colonial period, British practiced salutary neglect, which means that it loosened its enforced colonial regulations, essentially letting the colonies do what they want and they would just reap the benefits, but not placing too much of a constraint on them. This allowed the colonies to develop habits of self-government, and this became their standard, and local autonomy. So colonists also interacted constantly with native people through trade, alliances, war, and cultural exchange. So now we have overall just a lot of native diversity, European exploration, Columbian exchange, Spanish conquest, colonial development, native resistance, and slavery of our growingly distinct colonial societies. Now let's look at some of our vocabulary. Indigenous America is just Americas before European colonization. We have Cahokia, a major Mississippian city. Three Sisters, which is cornmeal and squash. Matrilineal is the kinship where descent is traced through the mom. Kinship is going to be family and clan relationships where we have those ties that come and are passed down from our family and clan. We have potlatch, a ceremonial gift giving feasts practiced by some native peoples of Pacific Northwest to show wealth status and social obligation. We have Native American slavery, captivity and forced labor, and that was before and after European contact, but different than our radicalized chattel slavery, which will come later with our Africans. We have pre-Columbian environmental disasters. We have ecological problems before Columbus, such as drought, overfarming, or soil exhaustion that weakened some native societies. We also have European background before Columbus. We have the Crusades, which is a medieval religious set of wars between the Christians and the Muslims that increased European interest with trade, expansion, and contact with Asia. We have Reconquista, which is the Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from Muslims, which was completed in 1492 in Spain, and sugar cultivation, the growing of sugarcane, which became very profitable and helped expand plantation labor systems and slavery. So in the 1490s, we had, again, Christopher Columbus, that Italian explorer. We have the Columbian Exchange, the transfer. Again, we have the Treaty of Tordesillas, which was a treaty between Spain and Portugal, dividing the newly land outside of Europe between them. So we also have all of these. A new one is Tenochtitlan. So this fell in 1521, the capital of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs, which were a powerful empire in Mexico, conquered by the Spanish in the early 1500s. We have La Malinche, an indigenous person who served as a interpreter for Hernan Cortez during the conquest of Aztecs. We have the Inca, a powerful empire in South America. We have Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish priest who was criticizing Spanish cruelty towards the indigenous people. So he's more on the indigenous people's side. We have the Franciscans, which were Catholic missionaries, especially active in the Spanish Empire, who sought to. So they were the ones converting the natives to Christianity, even though the Spanish practiced quite cruel practices against the natives. We have the Jesuits, who were Catholic missionaries known for education and missionary work, active in the Americas. We have the Black Legend, the idea spread by Spain rivals that Spanish were uniquely cruel and greedy in America. So this was the idea that they were even more cruel than the other Europeans, just excessively so. We have the Virgin de Guadalupe, a religious Catholic symbol associated with the appearance of Virgin Mary in Mexico, which was important and is important today in Mexican society. We have the Sistema de Castas. We have Spanish colonial racial hierarchy that defined people. Yeah, so that was just your caste system. You have Métis, which is people of mixed French and indigenous society or ancestry. And we have Northwest Passage. We have the path from North America to Asia. We have Samuel de Champlain, which was a French explorer who founded Quebec and built alliances with the native people. We have Richard Hakluyt. We have Jacques Companies, Piracy, Spanish Armada, Jamestown, Powhatan Confederacy, Tobacco, Curse of Ham, which was the false biblical interpretation used to mainly justify racial slavery. So this is a good one that you can use in MCQ, FRQ, DBQ. And we have race, a socially constructed category in America, enslaved Indians, Middle Passage, British West Indies, English Civil War, and a conflict between Parliament and the King, which affected migration politics in the colonies. 1642, 1651, we have Navigation Acts, English laws used to control the colonial trade to keep wealth flowing to England under mercantilism. So they kept wanting to reap those benefits. We have the Glorious Revolution in 1688, the overthrowing of King James II in England, leading to constitutional monarchy and influencing colonial politics. We have the Dominion of New England, which is a British administrative union of several New England colonies created to tighten imperial control. Maryland, which is 1634, so this was a proprietary colony. Connecticut, which was a self-government and farming. Rhode Island, which was Roger Williams. We have religious freedom and separation from Puritan control. New York, this was taken by the English and from the Dutch. Originally called New Netherland, we have New Netherland, which is a Dutch colony. That was before, right? We have William Penn, who was founded Pennsylvania. We have the Quakers, it's the breadbasket. Carolina is a South colony that split into North and South. It was associated with plantation, again, because it's in the South. Now, we have the Pequot War. Again, that was a defeat for the Pequot. New England won. We have Metacom. Again, we have Wampanoag's leader who led resistance against New England's colonists in the King Philip's War. Bacon's Rebellion. Yeah. We have the Pope, who helped organize the Pueblo Revolt against the Spanish for being excessively cruel. We have the Yamasee War, a major conflict in the southeast between colonists and native groups, especially the Yamasee. We have the Walking Purchase 1737, a fraudulent land deal in Pennsylvania in which colonists cheated the Lenape out of the land. We have the Stoner Rebellion, again, the major slave uprising in South Carolina that led to stricter slave codes. 7-Year War was the global war between the British and the French, and in New North America, it was called the French and Indian War. We have the Paris and Hildesburg Treaties Agreement ending the 7 Years' War. And the Treaty of Paris affected the colonial America, while the Hildesburg settled the European side between Prussia and America and Austria. So that was the European portion. We are more concerned with the Treaty of Paris. Neyland was a Delaware religious leader who argued native people to reject the European goods and influence. Pontiac's War was a native uprising in the Great Lakes against the British rule after the French and Indian War. Proclamation of 1873. We have a British order banning the colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains after the Pontiac's War. So we have colonial economy and society. We have consumer revolution, currency acts. So that was just restricting colonial money. We have Caribbean exports. We have colonial cities, gang city system, which is a labor system on plantations. Enslaved workers were divided in groups under constant supervision. We have task system. We have Quaker anti-slavery. So they did not like slavery at all. We have slave trade, the buying and selling of people, provincial proprietorial or charter colony. So we have three different types. Provincial, royal were owned by the king. Proprietary were owned by individuals or families. And charter were through a charter that was like a group of people came to establish stocks, Companion ideal was the idea that marriage involved affection. Print culture, Great Awakening, and George Whitefield. Again, that preacher. The wampum, they were shell beads that were used by native people for ceremony, diplomacy, and trade. We have the Iroquois, the Native Confederacy in the Northeast, and we have the Middle Ground, which was where people could negotiate.